Well, hello and welcome to the stream. Let's go ahead and see what we can get into. We're going to do a little bit of Art Bell, and this is going to be premiered on February 19th, 98.
To Coast AM with Art Bell. Now, here's Art. Once again, here I am. Good morning. Coming up in a moment is Edgar E. Casey, the son of, that's right, the son of Edgar Casey, the sleeping prophet. So much to talk with him about. We will continue through the evening to monitor the anthrax story. We're getting additional information, and as we get it to you, we will get it on the air. So if you monitor here, you're not going to lose out at all. And now a very unusual opportunity to interview Edgar E. Casey. He is the son of Gertrude and Edgar Casey. Who you may know as the Sleeping Prophet, was born in Selma, Alabama, February 9th, 1918. Lives now in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Graduated from Duke University in 1939 with a B.S. in EE. Oh my. Employed in 1940 by Virginia Power as an engineer. Has military service, went to Officer Candidate School in the Signal Corps. I can see we're going to have a lot in common. Was a captain in the Air Force. Post-war, returned to work with Virginia Power, which is now Dominion Resources, and retired in 1983 after 43 years of service. He has 2 children. He is a registered professional engineer in Virginia, member of the First Presbyterian Church of Virginia Beach, and many more organizations. His published works include Edgar Casey on Atlantis, The Outer Limits of Edgar Casey's Power, and The Mysteries of Atlantis Revisited. Here is Edgar E. Casey. Edgar, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Art.
It is such an honor to have you on. Do you do many interviews?
I did one last week. I don't know as I do so many. I do know now and then.
I barely know where to begin with you. Radio's wonderful. We have the luxury of time with radio, and we don't have to do anything too quickly, or nothing's really pre-planned. So I think what I'd like to do is to ask you everything you can remember about your father.
I don't know whether I probed them long enough for that or not, Art.
Were the two of you close, Edgar?
The whole family was very close, Art. Dad was a very ordinary person in everyday life. He loved to work in the garden. He liked to fish. He liked to play games. He was a very good carpenter. He repaired shelves and doors. He built a garage at one house we lived in. It was just those 30 to 40 minutes once or twice a day when he was able to put himself into a self-induced hypnotic trance. So all intents and purposes, he'd go to sleep.
How did it begin for him? How did he even realize that he had this?
Well, this all began before my time, Art, so it's sort of hearsay, but I've heard Dad and the family talk about it.
Well,
he was a young, excuse me.
That's what I'm trying, right? It's good close hearsay, the best we're going to get, so tell us what they told you.
All right. When he was a child, he had some rather strange experiences. For example, he wasn't a very good student in school, and he was having trouble with his spelling lesson one night. And his grandfather kind of got impatient with him, and finally, my father said, "If you just let me think about it. Let me just study a minute, and I think I'll know everything." And his father said, "All right." Very roughly, he went out of the room, and about 5 minutes he came back. Meanwhile, Edgar Casey had laid down on his head on his spelling book and gone to sleep for 5 minutes. When he woke up, he knew every word in the book and what page it was on, and from then on, instead of a poor student, he became a very bright student.
That was at what age?
That was about when he was in school. I guess they had school then up through about what would be equivalent to the 7th or 8th grade, the kind of one-room schoolhouse.
So in other words, he actually slept on the book and absorbed it.
And that's what it sounds like. Later on, when he was a young man working in a bookstore, he lost his voice. Couldn't talk at all. Of course, he wasn't much of a salesman, and he couldn't talk.
No.
And all the doctors in town, he'd been to everybody, and none of them seemed to be able to help him.
Sounds like Gordon Michael Scallion.
Anyway, hypnotism was a sort of new fad then, and somebody suggested that why don't you try a hypnotist, that maybe he can give you a post-hypnotic suggestion such that you'll be able to talk when you wake up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Dad tried it, and there was a medical doctor, several people in attendance when they tried this experiment. And under hypnosis, he could talk a little bit, but he wouldn't accept a post-hypnotic suggestion from the hypnotist. And when he woke up or came out of his trance, he still couldn't talk. But the hypnotist suggested, he says, you're such a good subject, he says, maybe you can put yourself into a hypnotic trance. Maybe you can give yourself the suggestion. Maybe you'll take it from you instead of me. When Dad was, of course, he was willing to try anything, he laid down and immediately he was able to go to sleep or put himself into a hypnotic trance. He didn't remember anything he said at the time, but he described his condition and said it was due to congestion in the throat. He says, we'll clear this up. And he turned real red, his face got red, his throat got red. He coughed up a little blood and woke up and he could talk. And as far as I know, that was the first reading, the one on himself. And of course, the doctor, there was an MD there, Dr. Ketchum, who said, well, Edgar, if you can do this for yourself, maybe you can do this for some of my patients. But Dad was always willing to try to help anyone he could. And he tried giving readings for other people, and he was very successful, very accurate readings, and that's how he developed, as I understand it, this ability.
About what year would all that have been?
Well, this was way before my time, and when he was about 20 years old, it was back in the late 1800s in Kentucky.
The power of healing is one that I believe in very strongly, and that's a remarkable story. He coughed up blood, and he regained his power of speech. In other words, he cured himself.
He cured himself. That was the first so-called reading. I think the word reading came from lack of a better word to describe what he did.
Well, what he did sounds like diagnosis and treatment.
Well, that's true. That was his main, the main focus of his reading was the physical readings. He gave over 14,000 of these readings in his lifetime, and about 60% of them were diagnoses of other individuals' physical condition. He didn't actually treat the condition himself, as he did for himself there. But
he did diagnose.
He did diagnose it.
14,000 of them, Edgar?
Over 14,000. I think it's 14,470 something or something like that. There are copies of these readings at the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach with the doctor reports, the patient's reports, and of course the people who didn't follow them didn't get any results. If people followed them halfway, they got halfway results. And if they followed them in detail, they got excellent results.
By that you mean the diagnosis.
Diagnosis, right.
And then your father would recommend to them a course of action.
That's right. He would suggest a course of treatment. It varies. That was the thing. He didn't stick to any one particular thing. I mean, sometimes he would recommend an operation. Sometimes he would recommend a diet. Sometimes even osteopathic chiropractic treatment, which didn't fit well with the medical doctors. But sometimes he would describe compounds or herbs that he would give the formula for to make it up.
In other words, you could probably sense deficiencies of one sort or another in somebody's dietary habits, or
sounded like it.
Yeah. But did your father ever describe the precise way that he was able to discern this, or that it came to him, or was it a mystery to him?
I think it was a mystery to him and to everybody else. Of course, he was asked questions about it, and some of the answers sound as strange as the stuff. He said that this was an ability that he had inherited in a previous lifetime that he had done before. It sounded like an ability or talent that was developed. Now, this idea of reincarnation was something that came up much later in the early 20s. I had been born then, and it was while we were in Dayton, Ohio. Someone suggested, wanted I guess they call it an astrological reading. Wanted to know what effect the stars had on a person's life.
Right.
Well, the stars didn't have as much effect on anybody's life as his previous lifetime. That he proceeded to describe this person's previous lifetime and the effect it had on his present life. Now, and when he woke up and heard what he had said, he was as astounded as anyone else because he didn't know anything about reincarnation or karma. He didn't realize that many people in the world believed in it, and that he always said if he ever gave a reading that hurt anyone, he'd never give another. But he never did, and some of the life readings seemed, the vocational guidance readings seemed as helpful as some of his physical readings. So
Did he get any information on who he had been in a previous life? How much?
He did. It was a long time ago, and there were several previous lifetimes. I don't remember all the details of that now. You can, there's a book, a recent book written about it, I think, that mentions some of his previous incarnations.
When did you become aware? How old were you when you realized your dad was different?
Well, you know, Doc, growing up in a family is a little different than being exposed to this from, all at once from the outside. And when I was real little, excuse me, I thought everyone's father gave readings, I said, I guess the first real vivid experience I had with it was a reading on myself. I was about 7 or 8 years old. We just moved to Virginia Beach. And I was standing in front of a fireplace in a pair of flannel pajamas, and a spark popped out and set those flannel pajamas on fire, and they burned up just real quickly. And my mother was coming down the stairs with a shirt, grabbed me and wrapped the shirt around the pajamas and put out the fire. But it burned my left leg very badly. I was out of school about 4 or 5 months, and the doctor never looked at it. I asked Dad to please give me a reading. He did immediately and described what to do for it. And
what did you do for it?
Well, it was a number of things. It was fluids to wash it with. I think it was onion bean at that time. That preparation to put on it for a very severe burn. And as it began to heal later, the skin grew across, so I couldn't straighten out my leg. And then he told me what to rub on it, what to do to straighten it out.
Wow.
It did straighten out. I played football, basketball, baseball in high school or college, and it doesn't bother me at all. He even gave me something to remove the scar. I rubbed it on for a while, and then I decided I couldn't see it, and I didn't really care about it, and I quit doing it. So I still have a scar on the back of my leg, about half as big as the original one, from my ankle to my butt.
Okay, well, you regarded this then as a normal thing. But at some point in your life, you had to realize Dad's a little bit different than everybody else.
Oh, there's no question about it. And that was one of the things that got me into writing the first book. I had a life reading also. Now, not every life reading he gave described or mentioned Atlantis. Of the 14,000 readings he gave, about 2,500 of them are these so-called vocational guidance readings or life readings. About 700 of them, maybe almost a third, did mention past incarnations of people in Atlantis. Well, Atlantis was just a myth. It is for many people still. There isn't any proof that it ever existed. Of course, there's no proof that it never existed either. So I thought I could go down there to the association. We have copies of all these readings in the files at Virginia Beach. At that time, they were on microfilm, and had just been put on to preserve them. When the dad gave a reading, a copy was given to the patient, and a copy was kept on file. I said I could go down there and maybe look up all the life readings on Atlantis and find some proof that it either existed or didn't exist. At that time, I didn't care which way. I just wanted to know the answer.
Sure.
So I said, well, I could probably do this in a few weeks. That was a very naive idea. About a year later, I had read every life reading on Atlantis that I could lay my hands on. And the amazing thing about it was some of these readings given 20 years apart, they didn't contradict each other. And it wasn't that he gave a reading on Atlantis and said it existed. He gave a reading on a person and mentioned an incarnation in Atlantis and told that person's characteristics of life, described how it affected him now. And by putting all those little pieces together, trying to arrange them in some kind of chronological order, that's what came out of that book. But it turned out to be very successful. It came out in '68. It's still in print after 30 years.
And what is the name of it?
Edgar Casey on Atlantis.
And
Now we've got an update. The Mysteries of Atlantis Revisited.
yes.
When he gave these readings, this was before radiocarbon dating. And many of the statements he made back in the 20s and 30s, when many of them were given, sounded ridiculous because the ideas of geology and archaeology were quite different
Oh, yes.
then than they are now. And but he said that in North America 10,000 years ago or 20,000 years ago, and in South America even longer, that the poles had shifted in the past,
Mm-hmm.
so all kinds of things like that. Well, it sounded ridiculous. But now with radiocarbon dates of 17,500 in Pennsylvania, 20,000 in California, 35,000 in South America, it's turning out that man was in the places that Edgar Casey said he was at the time he said he was. So
Yes.
it kind of stands to reason that if statements like that were true. Well, he made the statement one time, Art, that the Nile River used to flow west into the Atlantic. That was 60 years ago. And of course, there wasn't any way to prove whether the Nile River flowed into the Atlantic or not.
Right.
That was millions of years ago. But in 1987, when they took the pictures from the space shuttle with the ground penetrating radar with the Hera, it showed that the old course of the Nile was west into the Atlantic, exactly where Casey said it was.
When you did all this research and you researched these people who had been said to have prior lives in Atlantis, what kind of proof did you run into or cooperation? For example, people who may have known each other, or references that could be checked from one person's reading to another person's reading, that kind of thing. Did you?
That was the thing. I call it the internal consistency of the reading. The fact that one reading didn't contradict another. A reading given 20 years later was just like a different person, was just as if it had stopped from thinking.
But did you find places where they corroborated each other?
Oh yes, about the times that he would very seldom did he mention dates unless somebody asked him. But he did mention 2 or 3. Now the origin, the myth of Atlantis, or the story of Atlantis, originated with Plato back in the 5th century BC, and he described it as he said that Solon, someone had been in Egypt, and the priest in Egypt had described to him this civilization that existed they called it beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which was the Rock of Gibraltar and another mountain on the other side of the Mediterranean, the entrance to the Mediterranean from the Atlantic. And he said it was beyond the Pillars of Hercules, out in the South Atlantic, and it was a great civilization and very vast, and it had been destroyed in a volcanic catastrophe 9,000 years earlier. Well, that put it in the class of a myth because nobody believed that there had been any civilization that long ago, right at 10,000 BC.
That's right.
And since Plato's story, there's been over thousands of books and pamphlets written about it. Some of them trying to amass evidence that Plato was right, and some of them trying to prove he was wrong, and some of them trying to rationalize the story by moving it to a different location or changing the date. And the thing that convinced me about it was the fact that Dad said that people had incarnations there, and he was so accurate in his physical readings, and he was so accurate in many of his other life readings, describing the kind of occupation that we had, the problems they were having with their family. The other readings had been accurate. The things he said in the other readings about geological and archaeological events past.
That kind of came later, didn't it?
Came later, right. But he has been so accurate in that, why, maybe there's some truth in this Atlantis story.
Maybe there is. I think that your father suggested there would be something called the Hall of Records found beneath the left paw of the Sphinx. Is that correct?
Mentioned in a reading, right?
when your father went under, he didn't really. He was called the sleeping prophet, but from what you've told me, it sounds more like he was the self-hypnotized prophet who would go into a sort of a hypnotic trance.
Well, that's true, and I don't really think of him as a prophet, Art. I think I know he he didn't really go to sleep and say that this is going to happen and that's going to happen. He always said that the future's not fixed; we can change it.
And we can
And that's I think it's a hopeful statement rather than something that's inevitable. But he did mention these things that had happened in the past, and when the scientific turns up shift in the past, and scientific turns up evidence for climatic changes, and in the past, at the times he said they were, and men being in the earth at the times he said they were, and the fact that man had been in the earth instead of a few 100,000 years, millions of years.
Miss Jesse, we're going through all these things now. We're at a break point, so hold on, relax. You got a good 10 minutes. We'll be right back to you. Edgar E. Casey, the son of Edgar Casey, is my guest. I'm Art Bell, and this is Coast to Coast AM. This is Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell. It is. Good morning. My guest is Edgar E. Casey, the son of Edgar Casey, who was called the Sleeping Prophet. Edgar E. Casey himself is now beginning to get up in years, and it is a very rare and opportunity, and certainly a great honor to have the chance to talk with him about his father and, in fact, about his own life. We'll get back to him in a moment. We're also monitoring, of course, the ongoing story that we spent the first hour and a half on with regard to anthrax. And we had one whale of a scare in Las Vegas earlier today. Is it over? Don't know. Hope so. Once again, here is Edgar E. Casey, the son of Edgar Casey, known as the Sleeping Prophet. Mr. Casey, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Art.
Sir, I'm curious, how old were you when your father passed on?
Well, he passed away in 1927 into World War II. I was about 27.
27. So by that time, you were fully aware of your father's abilities, differences, talents.
Oh, yes. I used to listen to readings when I was growing up for other people, and I knew what he did. Just nobody knew how he did it.
Edgar, when did he begin to get visions of earth changes? At what point in these readings did that begin to happen?
Actually, I think it came over a period of time. I think he didn't really make a lot of profit in, but he made statements in readings all the way from the early 20s on up till the time he died. And so some of these statements were years apart. Some of them were fairly recent in the 20s, 35, and 40.
Well, when he referred, for example, to pole shifts, was he referring to the fact that the poles had previously shifted, or did he know they would shift again, or both?
I think both. I think mostly it was about past pole shifts. That sounds like a wild idea when you first think
Not so wild today.
Not now. No, there's scientific evidence.
I've got to ask you to stay good and close to your phone because our connection could be a lot better.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to talk a little louder.
Oh, that's excellent. Absolutely excellent. What else, other than pole shifts, did your father see coming for our world? Did he really look ahead at any point and give us any indication of what's coming?
Well, he always said, Art, that the future is not fixed, that people can change it. He did mention one thing that we have some scientific corroboration of, and speaking about future earthquakes, he mentioned some particular areas in the United States. You know, the largest earthquake in the United States was not in California, but in
Missouri.
Missouri, right. Well, he mentioned these particular areas, and some 30 years, 25, 30 years after that reading was given, there was an organization, the American Association of Engineering Societies, that made a study of the fault zones in the eastern United States. And they published maps of these areas. And in fact, we have them in our book, Mysteries of Atlantis Revisited. There's a chapter there dealing with the earthquakes. And we got permission to publish these maps of the fault zones. And the interesting thing about it, they were exactly the same areas that Casey mentioned years ago. And the unsettling thing about it is that this organization concluded that the likelihood of a major earthquake in the eastern United States in the next 25 years, this was published in 1987, was 100%. So that's pretty near certainty.
That's pretty near certainty.
They don't know where or which area is going to be affected, but these areas were exactly the same ones that Casey mentioned. So I hope they're both wrong.
Did he ever describe to you when in trance, when in self-hypnosis, or rather how he would visualize things? Would he actually see them? Would these things come to him as a simple knowledge or a voice? Or in what manner was information imparted? Did he ever talk about that?
My brother and I wrote a book about that, Art. The Outer Limits of Edgar Cayce's Power. In fact, it dealt with the readings that were wrong. Everybody talks about Cayce's accuracy and how good he was, and he was accurate. But we thought that we could find there were some readings that seemed to be inaccurate. And we found maybe 150 to 200 out of the 14,000. Of course, that gives him still a pretty good percentage.
It sure does.
99 or something like that. But anyway, we thought that you could learn as much about psychic ability in general, and Edgar Cayce in particular, as by studying these ones that were wrong. I mean, where did he get his information?
And in what manner again?
I think there are probably at least four sources of psychic information. I think what applies to Edgar Cayce probably applies to any psychic. He was just especially a good one. But one would be unconscious memory. That is, everything you've ever thought or read or heard is somewhere in your mind, though you don't maybe remember it consciously all the time. He can tap that source. Another one would be telepathy. That is the communication of his mind with the mind of another individual, either living or dead.
And either in close proximity or on the other side of the world.
That's right. Of course, you would only know in that case what that other person knew. If you were trying to diagnose someone, I suppose unconsciously, subconsciously, that person, all the reactions in the body of the person he's diagnosing, if subconsciously that person knows what's wrong with him, maybe he doesn't consciously know all the reactions of that. If you could communicate with his mind, subconscious mind, you could give a beautiful diagnosis of what his trouble was.
Mr. Casey, there are many who might suggest what your father did is the ancient equivalent of what's now known as remote viewing.
Well, that's another source that would be that clairvoyance. That is, seeing things in the distance. Not in every reading, but in some readings, he would say, well, there's a beautiful rooster, this man has a beautiful rooster in his yard. Or he's looking at a rose bush, or he's arguing with his wife.
That's very
outside.
Very specific.
in every case, we never found him to be wrong in a case like that. We always would try to call up the person or write the person and say, you know, do you have a red rooster, or where you are with your wife, or what were you doing at that? And we never knew him to be wrong in a case like that.
Then might I suggest to you then that you mentioned when he was wrong, the few times, percentage-wise, that he was wrong. He said himself that not all that he saw would necessarily come true. In other words, we are not bound in some horrible little dance of what the future is going to be inevitably.
Right. Let me give you an example of that. That brings us to the fourth source. There's two ways of looking at this source. Some people think there's such a thing as the Akashic record. That is, that everything that happens in the world leaves a record in time and space. And if you could tap this source of information, you have great infinite knowledge.
Yes.
Another way of looking at it is to think of it that we live in a third-dimensional world. For example, if you take a point and move it in a direction not contained within itself, you get a line. That's one direction, one dimension. It's infinitely long, but it has no width. If you move the line at right angles to itself, you get a plane, two-dimensional. It has no thickness, but it's infinitely long and wide. You move the plane at right angles to itself, you get a cube, three-dimensional world. That's the kind we live in.
Right.
Suppose you could move that at right angles to itself, a direction not contained within itself. We can't conceive of that.
You would then be moving in another realm or dimension.
Well, suppose we moved it in time and space. Suppose it existed yesterday, today, and tomorrow, and that we're only conscious of the present. If Dad could somehow move into this other dimension, let me give you an example. Suppose we have a plane, a two-dimensional plane, it has no thickness, but it's infinitely long and wide, and we have a two-dimensional bug crawling in this plane in a little sine wave pattern, and he has a free will, he has a memory. He remembers where he was, he knows where he is, he knows nothing about it. You're looking down on this plane. You see where he's been, you see where he is, you see everything that could possibly happen to him in the future, and you see it all at once. Now, he could never understand how you could see his past and present and future all because he has no concept of this third dimension. Right? But if he has a free will, you could look at him and say, well, now, if you continue in the way you're going at 3 o'clock tomorrow, you'll be right over there, and you'll be right. But since he has a free will, he could decide to go off in another direction, to change his sine wave pattern and go somewhere else. You could see everything that could happen to him and what would be most probable. But you couldn't be sure what he was going to do.
Well, I sure hope your father was right.
Well, I hope so too. Well, this way, if the past and present and future all existed once, and the future exists as probabilities, and he could see what was likely to happen, but he couldn't be sure because it depends on what people do. And of course, it's a little more complicated with millions of people than one little bug, but you get the idea.
I do. Also, it was said that your father, when he would go into trance, when he come out of trance, out of a particularly difficult viewing, and that this became worse as the years went on, it would drain him physically, make him weak.
Well, what happened, Art? Normally he would give 1 or 2 readings a day. That is, it took a certain amount of, it wasn't exactly like physical exercise, but I suppose it was a mental strain in a way. But he became popular when the book There's a River came out, and he became popular overnight. People began to call him in the middle of the night, kind of like this conversation. But they say, my wife is dying, my daughter's dying, the doctors can't help her, can't you do something for her? Please give her a reading. And he got hundreds of those requests. He had to have a phone number, get an unlisted number. They brought the mail there in trucks. And he couldn't not help people. He felt like it's something he had to do. Instead of giving 1 or 2 readings a day, he started giving 4, 5, 6, 8, 10. I mean, it was too much of a strain. In fact, he had a breakdown, and he had a reading on himself, and it just said that you're trying to do too much. If you continue to do this, you'll kill you. And he continued to do it.
He was, I'm sorry, how old was he at his death?
67.
67. That's actually fairly long-lived for those times. Right. Not a bad age. What is your current age, sir?
I had my 80th birthday
You're 80 years old.
How about that?
Oh, congratulations. Oh, that's really something. Your father obviously passed on to you some good things and some strong genes.
I hope so.
Did he pass on to you anything else?
Well, of course, I had life readings. I don't talk about my personal readings, but I think they were very accurate. They helped me.
Did he pass on to you any inherited ability?
I don't have any psychic ability. The only thing I can remember, I had a dream once I was eating a giant marshmallow, and when I woke up, the pillow was gone. I was kidding, but I really don't have any psychic abilities.
What has it been like? You're now 80. What has it been like, sir, living with what your father was all these years? It surely has changed your life and affected your life completely.
Well, I think it does. I mean, he suggested the way I should go to school. He even said, you could get scholarships and go to Duke and study engineering. He said, now, I graduated from a little high school that had 28 people in its graduating class in Virginia, in Beach. And the chances of getting a scholarship from a small school looked like the chances of a snowball in hell. Mm-hmm. But I was valedictorian of the class, but I was still at the small school. And I put in for a scholarship and I got it. So he was right about that. And then you proceeded. I've enjoyed engineering. I think it's not, you don't get rich, but I think you have a satisfying life. That is, in my case, if you're happy in what you're doing, happy in what the kind of work you do, I think that's the important thing, not how much money you make. But,
well, you were an engineer, so you were in the hard sciences.
That's right. That's a long ways from psychic research.
Sure is. Was that difficult for you at times? I am into electronics, and yet I deal with this kind of material on the radio.
Well, I had a kind of a dual ratio there. I mean, I was living in a family with a man who was probably one of the most remarkable psychics in the country, and I watched it every day. I mean, I can just tell you an example of a reading, some of the kind of things that would happen to be kind of curious. I used to listen to him when I was growing up, and he had a reading one time on a man that was supposed to be in his apartment in New York, and his mother gave him some. He said, you will have before you the body of so-and-so with that this address in New York. All he had to know was the person's name and where he would be at the time of the reading. Well, he lay there for a minute. He said, he's not here. He said, he's coming across town on a bus. And there's a lot of traffic. The bus is late. He said, we'll wait. He lay there for 15 minutes to say a word. All of a sudden, he said, he's come in. And he proceeded to give the reading. At that time, my brother got up, went in the other room, and called the man on the telephone. The man said, that's exactly right. That I knew I was supposed to be in my apartment. I was on the way there. There was a traffic accident. The bus was late. I just this minute walked in. That is a beautiful piece of clairvoyance that I don't see anybody could have seen.
Did it ever scare you?
I don't know if it ever scared me. It made you think a lot of times.
Really hard. I wonder how a young man who's becoming an engineer was able to square all of this. And were there times early in the early years in your education when you would reject or just simply couldn't believe, or did you always simply understand what your father did was a normal thing for you?
I don't know if I considered it normal. I realized that it was pretty abnormal, but I had seen it work in so many cases. I grew up with it, and he had people that were successful. I had readings that were so successful with people. They had remarkable cures. They suggested vocations for people that succeeded in them after they take up this occupation or this, you would be good at it and stuff like that. And this has happened to me. It happened so many times that, you had faith in it. You thought that you knew that he was right. You knew he was accurate. Now, I don't know how. That was one of the reasons we wrote this book, this Mysteries of Atlantis Revisited, that it showed the archaeological and geological discovery that had happened in the recent past to show how accurate he was.
You are a very devout Christian, obviously. Was your father?
Yes, he was. He taught Sunday school in the Presbyterian Church. My brother and I both did too. As a matter of fact, he had Virginia Beach.
Were there conflicts between his religion and the fact that he was a prophet, and we all know what it says of prophets in the Bible, that they've got to be completely accurate or they're false prophets, and there must have been those accusations.
Well, a lot of people didn't know what Dad did here. You know, when we first moved to the beach, it was a very small little fishing village. It wasn't the resort it is today. And most people thought he was a doctor. They used to call him Dr. Casey. They really didn't know what he did. And he was a very normal person in everyday life. And most of the people, except someone who had a reading, well, they knew him as in everyday life. They knew what a good carpenter he was, what a good gardener he was, and knew what a nice person he was. And he devoted his life to helping people.
Mr. Casey, we're at the bottom of the hour. We'll do just 30 more minutes, and I'd like to open the lines and let some of my audience ask you questions, if that'd be all right.
Certainly.
There
is a number that people can call that.
Okay, hold on to that. We'll get it on right after the bottom of the hour. Edgar E. Casey is my guest. This is Coast to Coast. From the Kingdom of God, this is Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell. Rise to the Rockets Card at 1-800-825-5033. The Central Market is in Puerto Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and Mexico. At 1-800-618-8255. First-time callers may recharge area code 702. 71222. And you may fax art at area code 702-727-8499. Please limit your faxes to 1 or 2 pages. This is Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell. Now again, here's Art. Once again, here I am. My guest is Edgar E. Casey, the son of Edgar Casey, known as the Sleeping Prophet. Mr. Casey is 80 years of age. This is a very rare opportunity for you to ask a question. If you have one, you know the phone numbers. Here we are. We'll get back to them in a moment. All right. Once again, Edgar E. Casey. Mr. Casey, of your father, how much is currently today myth versus what really happened?
I guess it's a lot of books have been written about him, Art. Probably the best one is a River by Tom Shagrew, who was my brother's roommate in college. That's an account of how he started his work. And Tom, in fact, I helped carry Tom upstairs when he had gone from 180 pounds down to about 90, and the doctors told him to go somewhere and die. There wasn't anything they could do for him. He was paralyzed down, he couldn't move. And he followed the treatments and the readings Dad gave, and he wrote the book when he got well. He never got so he could walk without crutches, but he did get up to the point he could go back to his job with the American Magazine and Herald Tribune and newspaper.
So would you say the majority of what we know, or what we can certainly read in that book, is accurate and not myth?
Well, I guess it depends on who you read, what you read. The fact that he was a prophet, I think, is a little exaggerated. I know he did say some things about the future that, about the past, that have certainly been proven accurate.
Well, one of the things he said was that there would be a hall of records found beneath the left paw of the Sphinx. Now, I interviewed the director of antiquities, Zahia Was, not long ago, and he answered in his normal a very boisterous Egyptian accented voice. There has never been one grain of sand found here to show that there's anything that would relate to Atlantis. And that's what he said. But on the other hand, Mr. Casey, there are radar records, ground penetrating radar now, showing that there are chambers beneath the Sphinx.
There are records showing that there are certainly anomalies. Whether they're chambers or not hasn't been proven. You know, getting permission to dig beneath the Sphinx is kind of like going to Washington and said, I'd like to dig a hole under the Jefferson Memorial or the Lincoln Memorial or the Washington Monument.
Very much like that, yes.
It's, it's the national treasure. You can't just go there and dig where you want to. Maybe they just haven't dug deep enough. The also interesting thing, I don't know whether Zahi was mentioned this or not. In fact, it upset a lot of the archaeologists. Professor Schock from the Yale trained geologist, his specialty was rock weathering. And he went over to Egypt and looked at the base of the Sphinx. And he said that the weathering was definitely water weathering. It was not wind and sand weathering.
That's correct.
Person that would know, and he presented his findings at a geological convention in California.
As a matter of fact, there have been sea incrustations removed from the rear side of the Sphinx.
Well, I know that the weathering there was, he says that it's water, and if it was, that means the Sphinx is much older than they thought. In fact, the work that the ARE did and sponsored in carbon dating the pyramids, of course, you can't carbon date stone, but you can carbon date fiber or bugs or any kind of plant that's gotten in the mortar. And the interesting thing about it was they wouldn't let us take any samples from inside the Great Pyramid, but they did let us take stuff from the outside. Well, it turned out that the pyramid was several hundred years older than they thought, which means that the pharaoh they thought built it didn't, or else he lived a lot earlier than they think, and that really upset the Egyptologists. In fact, the blocks at the top turned out to be 300 or 400 years older than the ones at the bottom. It wasn't built from the top down, so that would indicate that the probably were repairs made to it. And if that was true, then it must be much older than they think it is.
Boy, would I like to have you in the same room as Zahi was. All right, let's go to the phones and say, first time caller line, you're on the air with Edgar Casey. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hello.
My name is Martha.
Where are you, Martha?
In Kentucky. I'm really glad to talk to you, Mr. Bell, because I listen to your show all the time.
Thank you.
And it's really great.
Thank you.
In fact, I sent you a few
Messages.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have a question for Mr. Casey?
Yes, I will talk to Mr. Casey. I got to know the ARE when my sister had psoriasis really bad, and nobody could fix it. And of course, every doctor has, 10 different reasons why you would have psoriasis.
Sure.
And I'm a registered nurse, so I went to the ARE to get help for her, and in fact, she was healed. And Edgar Casey had these things that he said you should do for psoriasis, and it got better.
So then a lot of, Mr. Casey, a lot of the things that your father said as he took readings, then later applied to other people in some way, in some help?
Yes, other people. That psoriasis is a good example. In fact, there's a doctor up in Pennsylvania, I believe, that has treated a number of people by putting together a lot of the readings that Edgar Casey gave on people with psoriasis and making up a sort of regimen of treatment. And he's had great success in, as you say, curing people who have psoriasis.
You told us there was a phone number that you had that people could call.
There is an 800 number. If anybody's interested in knowing more about the readings, the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach does have a record of them. The number is 1-800-333-4499. And they can either call that number or they can write the association or the Edgar Casey Foundation at 67th and Atlantic Avenue, Virginia Beach, 23451.
Will the Casey Foundation continue?
I'd like to think so. there's an organization that probably has 25, 30,000 members in the United States and many members overseas in other countries, and the purpose is to preserve the records that Edgar Cayce gave and make them available for study. And one thing that, as you pointed out, or Mark pointed out, one thing that can be done is people can come there and look at it and see if there are any suggested treatments for ailments similar to what they have that might be useful in their case. Of course, most of these readings are for individuals. What might apply to one person might not apply to another.
Did your father tackle diseases that were in fatal final stages, cancers, heart problems, that sort of thing?
Sometimes he would say, that there's nothing that can be done for this person.
Oh, he would.
Oh.
He would. He would say, he would virtually tell people they were going to die.
Yes, and it just he suggests ways to make them comfortable, but he said that, there's nothing too late.
Did your father ever tell you, Mr. Cayce, where he thought his power came from?
I don't think he knew. He had life readings on himself that said it was developed in a former life, or in former lives. I think the sources that we talked about a few minutes ago, I think they apply, and I think he probably used a number of them. There's the rest of that chapter had on the nature of psychic perception in the book had some reasons for why sometimes they work better than others. The fact that the attitudes and the purposes and the reasons for the reading seem to affect it. I know for a fact that Edgar Cayce was physically ill, if he had a bad cold, or if he had a stomachache, if he had the flu, or if he were emotionally upset about something, that he didn't get as good a reading as he would when he was perfectly healthy. So certainly his physical health did affect the accuracy of some of the readings. I think there's such a thing, I guess you could call it psychic static, that, sometimes you don't always get perfect radio or perfect television reception due to a thunderstorm or leaking ignition on a car or a transmission line or something that bothers the reception. I think there's maybe a static like that. In other words, the purposes of the reading, Dad wanted to help people. If you had a woman with a child who wanted to get well or was sick, the woman wants the child to get well, the child wants to get well, Edgar Cayce wants to help the child get well, uses it as a sort of empathy between them that is conducive to a very good reading. And sometimes if somebody comes up and says, well, I'm looking for an oil well or a gold mine, and I'll give you a little bit of it if we find it, what's that purpose? It's a selfish purpose. They're not trying to help themselves.
I was just about to ask you about that. Whether he had been approached in that manner, whether people and whether he in fact even used what he had to at times enrich himself.
I don't think he tried to enrich himself. He didn't. In fact, when in the story, again, it happened before my time, but in Kentucky, he would be asked questions in some of the physical readings. Somebody at the end of the reading would say, well, now, who's going to win this horse race? What's going to happen to the stock market? And he would answer much to the person's profit. But when he woke up, he wouldn't feel well. He would have headaches. He would feel noises. He just realized that something was wrong, and he couldn't figure out what it was. And when he found out what was happening, he got very mad. He backed up and moved his family from Hopkinsville to Selma, Alabama, where I was born, and just opened a photographic studio, quit giving readings.
So over that exact issue.
Exact issue. And when my brother was burned with some flashlight powder, he began giving readings again. He gave a reading on him, and it was remarkable. The doctor said he was going to lose his sight. They wanted to take out one eye to save the other, and they didn't have to. And it was one of the first uses of tannic acid for burns. And he then got well, and Dad started giving readings again. But from then on, the mother was the one who conducted the readings and gave him the suggestion for. There was someone he could trust that wouldn't stick in these questions about gold mines or oil wells or whatever, and he was able to continue successfully from then on.
Mr. Cayce, is there anybody in today's world, in the modern world, that you would consider to be the equivalent of your father?
He then went all over the world studying psychics and meeting them, and he never found one that was as accurate as Casey was over as long a period. There are many people in this country and all over the world that have varying degrees of psychic ability, but I don't know anyone who has the track record of Edgar Casey. I mean, he gave thousands of readings over a period of 20 or 30 years, and we have the records of them there. I mean, people can come down there. The library is open. It's free. You can come and look at the readings and look at the reports and see what he says, and we're not trying to hide anything. In fact, we're trying to make it available for you.
But Mr. Casey, still today then, your father's power, where it came from, why he had it. We know how he used it, but all the rest, we don't know any more today than we did the day he did the first reading.
That's probably true.
All right, Wildcard Line, you're on the air with Edgar Casey. Good morning.
Good morning, Art. And Mr. Casey, it's truly a great honor. I have a deep amount of respect for your father. I've read pretty much everything I can find on the man. I would suggest that everybody visit your organization's website.
Where are you, by the way, sir?
East Coast, near Washington.
Washington, D.C., all right. By the way, Mr. Casey, there is a website, is that correct?
I believe it is. I don't have the email address now.
Okay, well, I think my caller does. Caller?
It's www.are-casey, that's CAYCE.com. I want to say dash is a hyphen, so it's ARE-Casey.com.
Got it. Do you have a question?
It really is terrific. I've spent a great deal of time in there researching.
All right, we'll have a link up in the minutes.
Quick questions real quick?
Yes.
Let me just throw them out real quick. A, is it possible that Atlantis itself is buried beneath the sand at Giza, hence the pyramids, the Sphinx, and so on, are actually the remnants above what may be the thing beneath? Secondly,
I don't think so. He didn't say that. He said that Atlantis was located in the South Atlantic, that there were records of Atlantis buried in Egypt. In fact, he said there were some buried in 3 places in the world, some in South America, Yucatan, and some in Egypt, and some under the ocean.
with regards to his Raphael previous life,
Yes.
Which some people have interpreted as having been that Casey himself in the previous life placed the records in the Hall of Records. Was there anything further on that? And interestingly, also, his suggestion that the Earth changes would culminate in 1998 has always struck me as suggesting perhaps that they would in effect kick in and culminate with a major release of that energy in 1998, which of course is today.
He did mention 1998 as an important year, but again, he said the future's not fixed. You know, we can change it. I don't really know what's going to happen.
Anything on alien civilizations? There's been some suggestion I find on Mars, which has some relationship to Giza, that other previous civilizations, perhaps the Sumerians, were descended from the Anunnaki, a race from another planet. Was there ever anything as far as reincarnation from another species or any information about that at all?
As far as I know, there are no references in the readings to aliens coming to Earth with other civilizations. Dad did say there was life in the universe, period forms. Of course, there's lots of stars out there, lots of galaxies, and it's bound to be life of other kind somewhere else. But he didn't mention any of them coming to Earth, as far as I know.
Well, thank you very much, sir. Once again, it's a great honor.
All right, thank you very much. And east of the Rockies, you're on the air with Edgar E. Casey. Good morning. Where are you, please?
Good morning. I'm east of the Rockies. My name is Elliot.
All right.
Good morning, Mr. Casey. Good morning, Mr. Bell. I believe I was telling you where I was from last time was the reason my call was disconnected. So we'll talk about that.
No, I don't disconnect people for geologic locations. Anyway.
I'm not saying that you did.
I see.
That something else did.
MIBs. All right. Do you have a question?
Yes, I do. I've heard from friends of mine who have a high-level position in the government that there will be a whole shift taking place. It will be happening, and I was given a rough estimate around the year 2005.
All right. There are many who believe that, Mr. Casey. Did your father project or tell anybody when he thought the next pole shift might occur?
I don't remember any specific examples of that. He did say there might be changes in 1998 on up through 2000. He didn't say exactly what kind, and he didn't. I think there may be. I mean, I don't know, but again, it's we can change that, even physical changes.
Mr. Casey, as you look around today's world and listen to today's news with anthrax and wars and social disruption and so much that has changed in our society, would you think your father to be pretty much on track with regard to predicted changes for beginning in 1998? I mean, is that the way the world looks to you?
Well, you know, the media plays up a lot of the exciting things or the bad things. There's a lot of good folks out there and a lot of good things happening other than anthrax and people trying to destroy the world. But we have, I know we have, I think, done a lot of things that we could do better. And hopefully people will change their attitude and about things in the future and not get us into these situations that lead to our destruction.
You're a hopeful man. West of the Rockies, you're on the air with Edgar Casey and Not a Lot of Time. Hello.
Yes, this is Steve from San Diego.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to talk to you, Mr. Casey. Quick preface, your father's legacy followed me around for about 5 years as a teenager before I finally got around to reading the biography. But wanted to know, in the biography there are two paranormal experiences or powers that were mentioned for your father as a child. One was that he could put books for his schoolwork under his pillow and read them at night while he was asleep. And the other was that he had this fright or Dixie type of play friends.
All right, Mr. Casey.
This was before my time, and these are stories I've heard that he could see people when he was a child that other people couldn't see. He had playmates that other people couldn't see, but he did have that experience of being able to memorize, or by sleeping on a book, just memorizing the content. And he did turn from a poor student into a very good student with that ability. Yeah, this was before I was born, so I can't testify. I understand that a lot of stories have been told about that, and I've heard Dad tell it.
Mr. Casey, do you have children?
Yes.
Do they have any abilities?
As far as I know, they do not. They have some good abilities, but they're not psychic. Most of them, my son graduated from Duke as an electrical engineer. My daughter graduated from Ohio State in psychology, a major in BS in psychology.
Boy, what a pleasure it has been to have you on the program. I know it's getting mighty late back there.
Well, I guess more, it's getting mighty early. It's about 5 minutes to 4 here.
All right, Mr. Casey, I'm going to say thank you, and I hope one day I'll have an opportunity to interview you again. You're a class act. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you, Art, and I hope you got a copy of our book. And,
I did. I surely did.
Well, I hope you get the chance to read it sometime and enjoy it, and I've enjoyed being on your program. Thank you for having me.
Good night, Mr. Casey. That's Edgar E. Casey. From the high desert, this is Coast to Coast AM. Joining at this hour, it is best that I simply read a little bit from it. The threat, the secret agenda, what the aliens really want, and how they plan to get it. Quoting the professor, in my most recent research, I have uncovered information that allows UFO researchers to solve the UFO mystery. At least the questions that will leave the greatest impact upon us. I've put many pieces of the puzzle together. I've focused the picture, and I do not like what I see. For the first time in over 30 years of researching the UFO phenomenon, I am frightened of it. Understanding has led to a profound apprehension for the future. The abduction phenomenon is far more ominous than I had thought. I know why the aliens are here, and what the human consequences will be if their mission is successful, end quote. The professor will be back in a moment. They do. You have concluded that there is going to be an integration, that there is going to be, that our Earth, our planet, is going to be their realm. And what position do you conclude that we would have under such a circumstance, assuming that there was a classic landing and they arrived? we would be in the middle of some sort of anarchy or Mad Max scenario or nuclear war or ecological meltdown or something that they would have precipitated. Is that about right?
Well, I really don't know, and I guess that's possible, but to tell you the truth, I tend to think it's going to be a little bit different. I think that certainly it might happen, but I think it's afterwards that's the most important thing. And one of the oddities of the abduction phenomenon that we've noticed over the years, once again, this is to my research and other researchers who I think do excellent work and who I trust, like Glenn Hawkins. One of the interesting things we see is that these beings virtually never ask questions about the society that we would expect them to ask. They don't ask the abductees what they do in Saturday night. They don't ask them about who is this guy Clinton anyway and what the movies show. And we really don't get any kind of serious discussion about the normal institutions of American society or global society as a whole. Now, they do even ask about Monica Lewinsky. You know, that would be an exception, and they do ask quite a lot about her.
I'm trying to get a laugh about it. It's a very serious topic.
So my guess is because of this almost total lack of interest in the institutions of our society, that if they plan to integrate into the society, it will be with their institutions. And when we take a look at their society, which is actually a kind of double society, it's an alien society and a hybrid society within that particular society, what we see is a fairly regimented hierarchical society in which everybody knows his or her place. Everybody does his job. It seems to be a work-oriented society. And it's a society based on telepathy. Now, telepathy is, in my opinion, a society in which one would not want to live. In telepathy, the idea of individualism is severely mitigated.
Now, frankly, Professor, what you are describing sounds like the unattainable socialist or even communist ideal.
In a way, that's probably true. Now, I can't tell what their economic situation would be like, certainly, but I can say that it's not a society that we would find attractive.
Well, you talk about stressed individualism. You talk about everybody virtually knowing their place. I assume everybody in their place being taken care of according to their needs.
I would assume it would be something like that. Now, when they talk about the society of the future and how it's going to be so wonderful and it's going to be so grand and all that, the question is, who are they talking about when they're talking about the society? Who exactly are they being talking about? And they're talking about themselves, of course, and they're talking primarily about abductees. Non-abductees, people who have not been involved in the abduction phenomenon, are almost never discussed. They're virtually never mentioned. It's almost as if they're expendable. Like they really don't matter. The non-abductees are sort of superfluous in this kind of society. Abductees, these things have a fairly substantial investment in a number of ways. And non-abductees, they don't. And so the question that bothers me quite a bit is, in this new world order, so to speak, what will happen to people who are not abductees? And this is an answer that I hate.
Let me stop you and ask you, then, are you saying the abductees would be the rough equivalent of inmate guards?
Well, that I don't know. That I wouldn't go so far as to say. And I hope that... I hope there is some sort of a role for non-abductees. Some people have indicated that non-abductees are expendable. They will be eliminated. Other people have said that non-abductees will be used for as a breeding population primarily. But the key thing here is that we don't know what will happen to non-abductees, and we should know that. I mean, this is something that we have to find out, and we don't know that, and they just don't talk about that, and it will be very uneasy. I think that the sort of pecking order will be the insect-like ones at the top, followed by, and I'm not sure where to put the reptilians, but certainly followed by probably the gray aliens, and then the hybrids, and then abductees, and then non-abductees. This will be a very ordered society that emphasizes the group ethic rather than the individual ethic. And, well, it's just, the Americans are not going to like them. I don't think anybody's going to like this. I think that this is, I can, in my more lucid moment, think that we're looking at catastrophe in the making. And I'm not an alarmist type person. I never have been, in fact. I'm quite the opposite. Right, well, when I take a step back and listen to myself talk, I can't imagine that I'm saying these things because the whole thing sounds crazy anyway. But I've got to go where the evidence leads me, you know, and as an academic, you have to filter out everything else that will make sense until you come to that won't make sense, rather, until it comes to something that does make sense. And even though it sounds nonsense,
Professor, so the audience might understand, particularly the ones who just joined, you have come to these conclusions as a result of your investigation of how many abduction cases?
Well, over 700, maybe 725 something.
That's a lot of abduction cases. A lot of them.
It's not so much that it's a lot. I spend a lot of time with each abductee, and I'm extremely careful in each session. And each session will last anywhere from 1 hour, which is rare, to 3 hours of hypnosis, and there's an hour beforehand of the discussion, an hour afterwards. So the average person spends about 5 hours here for each session that they come to, and so there's, I'm very careful and very cautious, at least I hope I am. And it's really not a matter of quantity, although that's important because you get a sense of what's happening overall, but also there's a matter of quality as well.
All right. In the world of non-abductees, and for the moment, until I learn otherwise, I'm going to count myself in that group. Particularly American non-abductees. Frankly, we are individualistic, rather greedy, mean bastards. We are a warlike people. We're about to prove it again next week. We are not easily subdued nor enslaved. We fight. We have guns. And frankly, most Americans would rather fight than switch. So when this integration occurs that you're talking about, I would think that America would be high on the list of non-cooperatives.
Non-compliant.
Yes, sir.
Problem with that is that it's the neurological and physiological superiority that these beings have. In other words, it's been shown over and over again in virtually every abduction event ever recorded that these beings have the ability to control people, and they can control them from a distance.
So in other words, you were suggesting when the integration occurs, whatever part the abductees play, the non-abductees will be immediately controlled.
Yeah, I think the abductees will be immediately controlled as well. I think that the abductee is going to have more specialized tasks to perform, but anybody who decides to run into the garage and get the AK-47 out is probably going to be controlled once they get into a situation where they can actually fire it. Now, this is really speculation, and I really don't know that, and I really shouldn't even be talking about that. But the best thing that I can say is that these beings have a physiological knowledge and superiority over us that is downright astonishing.
And the current leadership, our government, that understands what you understand about what's going on. Now, there have been tests of weapons, Star Wars-like weapons, that have virtually been shooting, Professor, at what are called fast walkers and vehicles moving at a very fast pace through our atmosphere. That would indicate there might be some in government to understand what's going on.
Well, that certainly may be possible, and there might be individuals who are onto this, and I hope that's the case. In fact, I hope that there's a large secret government study going on about this. I just hope that that's happening. That would give me some hope. I really do want that. I don't want to hear about the first one to come on my show and say 3 cheers for the secret government. I hope it's real. Well, in this case, I really do. To tell you the truth, my gut instinct, however, tells me, and as a historian, of course, I have looked at this subject for a number of years. Yes, tells me that I really don't see the government conspiracy in this particular area, and I really don't think that the government knows a whole lot about it, and I think that the government primarily takes cues from the scientific community, and virtually all of the major scientists and scientific community in this country feel that the subject is just total nonsense. You are, of course, referring to the government that we vote for. That is correct. Now, there might be other individuals, but here's the bottom line. Bottom line is that the government does not act as if it's real. It does not give money to study it in case it might be real. It does not encourage or discourage researchers who are studying it. It does not come out with information to give us knowledge of it. It acts as if it's not real. And therefore, for us in the research community, we just have to continue with our research live, yes, whether the government knows or not. Yes, well, Professor, if what you have suggested in the last hour and a half is true, then I would expect that as a reaction from the government we vote for. There could even be a hint that we would be on to them, or that in fact anybody's on to them. Well, that may be true, and once again, I hope it's true. I hope that they've got a super secret study. I hope they're spending money by the billions. You don't sound convinced, but we do have big budget programs, that's for sure. Well, I think that one of the things that we would see if this were going on was we would see a massive hypnosis of thousands of abductees around the clock, getting information about what this phenomenon is and how it's going to be played out. And I just don't see that, unfortunately. And once again, this is something that I would like to see. I want that. Well, if I was an alien, or I was part of a secret government that was trying to deal with this in some way or another, and I encountered Professor Jacobs, who's written a book called The Threat, detailing all of this, what they want, what it's really all about, the whole thing. I would say your life wouldn't be worth 2 cents. Have you thought about that? Well, perhaps academically, it may not be worth 2 cents anyway now, but I just never had personally any government involvement or government intervention or government interest or government knowledge in 1966 when I first started looking into the subject, and neither my friends at Hopkins, as far as I know, or most other of the abduction researchers anyway. And I take it that your fellow academics don't regard the threat as satisfying the publish or perish. Yes, you're right. They probably regard it only as the perish part. This is a matter that, for me, in 20th U.S. history, is, as they say, not the proper paradigm in which to study. It is something that they don't understand, that they almost all think is nonsense. And the problem with the academic community is that when you say abduction, military men, the first thing that goes to their mind is a rundown, like shuffling through a deck of cards, of every conceivable psychological, psychiatric explanation that could cause these stories to come forward. Of course, if Professor John Mack had not been successful in his fight, would you have been able to publish the threat? Oh, yeah.